All right, so the other day we talked about H. Paul Rico, and he was the man that started the trend in the city of Boston for FBI agents becoming way too deeply involved in the goings and comings of the underworld and crossing the line from a law enforcement official into the world of criminality. So the man that took his place upon his retirement in 1975 was Special Agent John Connolly, a Boston native, and he took this behavior to a whole different stratosphere. He more resembled a criminal or a gangster or mobster than he did an FBI agent in the height of his career. His own fellow FBI agent informants behind his back called him John Connolly because he came to work every day in these immaculate three-piece suits with a pinky ring on and his hair slicked back with $100 haircuts. He just did not present himself like an FBI agent or a law enforcement official. He looked more like a mobster or a gangster. So, anyways, John Connolly grew up in the old Harbor housing projects in South Boston, the same housing projects that the Bulger family grew up in. Whitey Bulger, Billy Bulger. He was especially close to Whitey Bulger's brother, Billy Bulger, growing up. Billy Bulger was a couple years older than him. John Connolly looked up to him as a positive influence. Billy Bulger was a total opposite of Whitey Bulger. Whitey Bulger was just a bad kid from the start, was always getting into trouble as a young kid, was involved with youth gangs as a preteen and a teen in South Boston, started robbing banks, went to federal prison at an early age. He was the black sheep of the family. None of the other children in that family led a life of criminality. They grew up in a pretty humble household. Their father had suffered a terrible injury. I feel like he was working for the railways or something, but he ended up having to have an arm amputated, so he couldn't really do like physical labor after that. So they lived in the old Harbor housing projects, and I believe it was like 6 or 7 kids in the Bulger family. But Whitey Bulger was a black sheep, and his brother Billy was nothing like him. Billy Bulger was like a excellent student. Having Whitey as your older brother obviously had its advantages. I'm sure nobody messed with Billy Bulger as a kid. I mean, he was always made fun of later in his life as a politician for his diminutive stature, for being a very short man. So, I mean, he wasn't like a big, tough guy, but he had brains. He's very domineering, aggressive attitude. He is kind of a bully, even though he's only about 5'2" or 5'4". I don't know if he's that short, but he's very short. But he's got a very sharp mind and a very sharp tongue, and he was able to bully people. And he went to school and he became a lawyer, and then eventually got into politics, and he became one of the most successful politicians in the state of Massachusetts history. He was the longest running state senate president in the history of Massachusetts. His tenure was 18 years. I don't even know what the closest one behind him was, but it was by far. He had a absolute grip on state politics in Massachusetts. The amount of power and sway that Billy Bulger held over the Commonwealth throughout the 1970s and 80s is hard to imagine today. He could stall things in the state legislature if he didn't like the governor, or he didn't approve of the kind of policies that the governor was kind of put through. He could stall all the stuff in the legislation in the state, and nothing would get accomplished. And he could be just like I said, he tended to be a bully, and he threw his power around. Basically had like a Napoleon complex. But he used to hold this St. Patrick's Day breakfast every year on East 8th Street in South Boston, and it was like if you weren't seen there, if you didn't attend, like, you'd be like on his blacklist. I'm sure a lot of people that used to attend there every year would prefer not to be there and be somewhere else, but it was almost like a thing, like you had to go there. It was all about appearances and just power plays. He would just like kind of hold them hostage there, and they'd make all these political jokes. And back in the day, he had Governor Weld, William Weld, who was like governor like for 3 terms in Massachusetts, and they came from different ends of the spectrum. Weld came from wealthy Brahmin class in Boston, and Bulger was from the working class Irish, and those were like the two opposite ends of Boston back in the 20th century. And they would go back and forth, and Bulger would make fun of him for being wealthy, and I don't know, it's a different time in Boston. But John Connolly thrived on this relationship that he had with Billy Bulger, and he used to bring any type of new agents when they would come into Boston. He would bring them to the state house and bring them right into Billy Bulger's office, and it was supposed to be, trying to impress them and show them, look at the reach I have, look at the powerful friends I have. John Connolly was very delusional. He really thought that he was much grander than his reality was. He thought for a while towards the end of his tenure in the FBI that he was going to be the police commissioner of the city of Boston. He actually believed that it was even a possibility for him to have this job. And when it became known that there was no way in hell that they were ever going to offer him a job like that, he was pretty defeated and squashed. Like, he thought he was that type of guy that people like looked at and thought that he could be a person in power like that. He just because he grew up in the same projects with Billy Bulger and was friends with Billy Bulger didn't mean that he was like the same type of person that Billy Bulger was. He really got into the kind of gangster persona. It was almost as if he enjoyed telling people to back off of Bulger. Like, if people were thinking about going to the police or testifying or, doing something that was going to hurt Whitey in a certain way. John Connolly, I mean, police officers and FBI agents aren't supposed to threaten citizens who are being threatened by violent criminals and feel like their lives are in danger. That's what the police are for. They're supposed to go to the police and ask for help. An FBI agent's job is not to go threaten people and tell them, you better not go do that because it's going to end up bad for you. That's exactly not what an FBI agent's supposed to do. And they're also not supposed to take inside information that they know from being a law enforcement official and knowing that there's investigations happening on people or they're looking into certain people. They're not supposed to take that inside information and hand it over to the criminals. The relationship between an FBI informant, an FBI handler, and an FBI informant is that the informant gives the handler information. The handler doesn't give the informant information. So the relationship was completely backwards. But John Connolly, he had this like hero worship thing for Whitey Bulger. Whitey Bulger was probably about like 10 years older than him. He was probably a legend in the projects and the streets growing up. John Connolly probably looked up to him. He always had this story that he told everybody about the first time he met Whitey. The first time he met the infamous Whitey Bulger, where he was on the basketball court, the playground in the projects in Southie, and these older kids were picking on him, and they were pushing him around, and I think they slapped his ice cream cone out of his hand, or they stole his ball or something, and Whitey showed up out of the cut, and he said, "Leave that boy alone," and he chased them off, and he, dusted off his ice cream, or picked up his ball and handed it back to John Connolly. John Connolly, "Oh, thank you, Whitey," and for then on, it was like, he would do anything to protect this man or to just aid him and abet him, And also he looked up to Billy Bulger in a certain degree the same way, but a little differently, I don't know. It was a different kind of admiration, but he certainly admired and looked up to Billy Bulger as well. And Billy Bulger tried to help John Connolly in a positive way. Like, he encouraged him to go to Boston College. He encouraged him to attend Suffolk Law School after. He encouraged him to go to try to become an FBI agent, and he had connections with long-standing Senator McCormick from Boston. He was like a long-time U.S. Senator from the Massachusetts area, and he was a South Boston native, and he kind of like patronized Billy Bulger and helped him his come up in the political game. And he was the one that sponsored John Connolly to J. Edgar Hoover. This young man is a great candidate for an FBI agent, How wrong were they? What a bad recommendation that was. Senator John McCormick also, I don't know what his first name is, I should have looked that up, but Senator McCormick also was the person that was looking out for Whitey Bulger when he was in the federal prison system in the 1950s and early 1960s, when he was committing the federal bank robberies across the country, and he got locked up, or he was in Alcatraz and Leavenworth and other notorious federal prisons. But Senator McCormick from Boston, because Whitey was a son of Southie, and he's looking out for his little brother Billy here, who's going to become a prestigious politician in the state of Massachusetts. So he was looking out for Whitey and telling the prison officials, just look out for this kid. He's from South Boston. He's from my hometown. I just don't want anything bad to happen to him in federal prison, this and that. I mean, this is like how these people from Southie were back in the day. Like, if you were one of their own, it didn't matter. Like, they were gonna do whatever to protect it. Back pre-gentrification, Southie was one of the most insular, tight-knit communities in the city of Boston. and I don't know, they protected their own. That's for sure. With that being said, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I feel like there's really no sense of community anymore in this day and age, and communities should do more to protect their own and look out for their own. It's kind of like people just throw each other to the wolves now. But on the other hand, I think it's a little bit silly for people at this day and age with everything that we know who still want to come out and try to like defend Whitey and stuff. Trying to say like Whitey was a good person or just I don't know what. They're trying to defend Whitey's character or something. And they're also, one guy was trying to tell me that Whitey was not an FBI informant. It's like, oh, that has got to be the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my entire life. He may have not given the FBI any useful evidence or information whatsoever. That's pretty evident. Steve Fleming was the one that was giving the FBI any evidence to take down the Italian mafia. Whitey Bulger probably didn't give them shit, but he was a top echelon FBI informant. That is not debatable. It's mind-boggling to me. And to me, that just seems like the most insane waste of time and energy to defend a man like that. But to each his own. Anyhow, so John Connolly, of course, he started off in the FBI and he was working in New York City. And then he clearly got tipped off to Frank Salemmi's whereabouts in New York City. And he was one of the most wanted people because he was on the run for blowing up Joe Barbosa's lawyer, John Fitzgerald's car, where the lawyer lost a leg, and he was on the lam. And John Connolly, when he was stationed in New York City, all he wanted to do was get back to Boston and be back in his hometown and back where he knew the people and he knew he could manipulate and pull strings and use his friendship and his relationship with Billy Bulger to make power plays and to rise in the FBI. This guy didn't just want to be just like one of the working minions. John Connolly, like I said, he had delusional thoughts of grandeur. He always saw himself as just like way above everybody else. And so, of course, I believe it was H. Paul Rico, but somebody gave John Connolly the tip about where Frank Salemmi would be, and then one day in Midtown Manhattan, he just so happened to bump into him in the middle of the street, and he made a heroic arrest, and he punched his ticket home back to Boston, which is what he wanted the whole time. And now he's back up there with Billy Bulger. He's in his hometown. He's operating, and then basically, I think the whole thing with Whitey I really don't think John Connolly ever thought that he was going to get any type of information from Whitey Bulger, or that Whitey Bulger was actually going to help him in any way, shape, or form get information about the Italian Mafia or take down the Italian Mafia. I think his sole purpose on recruiting Whitey as an FBI informant was to be able to protect him. He wanted to protect Billy's brother. Billy was completely legitimate, okay? Like, let's just be clear about that. Billy Bulger, whether or not he was, like a a short man with a Napoleon complex who used to like to bully people, and he could be abusive with his his words and stuff, but he was a legitimate politician. The guy was not corrupt. He had nothing to do with the stuff that Whitey was doing, but he was Whitey's brother, and he loved his brother. That's what I'm saying about how, like, South Boston was a different place. Like, you didn't disown your family member because they were a criminal. Like, he loved his brother, and he would defend him and do basically anything he could for him. And it ended up coming back to bite him in the ass later in his life, because after he retired from the state government, from the state senate, he got this cushy job working as some sort of head person at UMass Boston, and it was like a 6-figure salary when he was still going to get the state pension. And I mean, it was just one of those cushy jobs that government officials get upon retirement, where they can collect a shitload of money at the end of their career so they can live cushy for the rest of their life. And after all the stuff came up in the early 2000s, in like 2002, when Kevin Weeks flipped and they started, all the bodies from Whitey started popping up, and they were digging them up at all the beaches around South Boston and Quincy and the South Shore and stuff in Dorchester, like, Mitt Romney was the governor of Massachusetts, and he was not happy about it, and they pulled Billy Bulger in front of a grand jury, and they were asking questions about it, and that guy looked so uncomfortable. And they asked him, well, what did you think your brother was doing? What did you think he was up to? And he said something like, I thought he was involved in gaming, or he basically was trying to say, like, I thought Whitey was, a bookie, he was into gambling and stuff like that. He said he didn't know anything about the violence. Now, I'm sure that he knew that his brother was a killer, that he was a guy that had crossed that line. I don't think he knew any intimate details of any of the crimes that Whitey. I don't think they talked about this kind of stuff. I do think that he was always in regular contact with Whitey. I believe that they would have family dinners together. Whitey would come visit his house, or they would discuss stuff. And after he went on the run, it was proven that he made at least one phone call to Billy, and Billy lied about that. And I think that's what they used to finally take that job at UMass Boston away from him. Because Mitt Romney, after he was called in front of the grand jury, Mitt Romney and other people ended up saying, no, we can't have you representing, UMass Boston or Massachusetts. It's just, the whole thing was just, that's when all this stuff came out. It was like, people knew it for like a long time. Like the Boston Globe broke the story like back in the late 80s. And it was by the two authors, O'Brien and Lear. I feel like that's the names of the guys who wrote the book Black Mass, but they were Boston Globe reporters, and they originally broke the story about Whitey's quote-unquote relationship with the FBI. Of course, there was rumors and whispers that Whitey had some sort of relationship with the FBI, and people wondering, like, why, how is he still out on the street after all the stuff he's doing? Everybody else getting arrested. Certainly other law enforcement agencies, i.e. the Massachusetts State Police, the DEA, every time they would try to investigate Bulger, the FBI would get involved, and Whitey would get tipped off. Their listening devices would get discovered. Back in the early 80s, after the 1979 race-fixing scandal that had all the rest of the Winter Hill guys go away, and Whitey and Stevie Fleming were left out on the streets, and they consolidated like what was left out of the Winter Hill's assets on the street. They set up a garage on Lancaster Street, right down the street from the Boston Garden, and that's where they set up their operations, like a couple miles away from the North End, and that didn't really please the Aunt Julos that much. But State Police found out about this, Massachusetts State Police, and they rented a room. There was like this like rooming house that like winos and like weirdos used to hang out in and rent rooms weekly, monthly, and stuff. So the State Police rented one of these rooms, and they'd set up surveillance across the street, and they were watching them, and they were like, holy shit, like, what is going on here? Like, they would see all these different, every gangster from like, that was somebody in the city of Boston is like showing up to this garage and coming to meeting Whitey and stuff like that. So they were all over it. But then all of a sudden they snuck in, they planted a listening device. But very soon after that, the FBI found out that this was going on. And all of a sudden now Whitey and Stevie and the other guys in the garage are talking about how great the Massachusetts State Police are. And like how they solve all their crimes, and they're A-okay. And like the Massachusetts Police like, what the fuck? Like, how do they know we're listening? And this was just a trend that started every time a different law enforcement agency would start investigating Bulger, they would get tipped off. And anytime somebody was going to go tell on Bulger, or, had an inkling to go tell on Bulger, they'd find out about that as well. I mean, this is what I'm talking about. Like, how scary a time, like, in the city of Boston it was. Like, if you, like, take, for example, the liquor store in South Boston, I believe it's pronounced, like, Stipo Rakes or whatever. This legitimate family owned the liquor store, and Bulger decided that he wanted it for his headquarters. So he basically said, here, take this cash, it's mine now. And they were like, they didn't want to sell, and they weren't given a choice. And I guess like the story is Bulger and Weeks and stuff came to their house, and Bulger like put their daughter on his lap or something and put like a gun on the table. Not in a threatening way, just like to take it out of his waistband while he was holding the kid, but it was a subtle threat. So they were going to go to the police and ask for assistance because this guy's trying to strong arm them and extort them and take their business and their livelihood away from them. And they were threatened not to do that. And it's like insane. Like, how scary must that have been? You're a legitimate citizen, you're a legitimate business owner, and some gangsters coming and trying to take away your livelihood that you've worked hard for. There's nothing that you personally can do to stop this person. So you go to the police and ask them for help. And then an FBI agent, FBI is supposed to be even above the police. An FBI agent getting involved and threatening and saying, if you do this, like, it's your life and your family's lives are going to be in danger. Like, that must have been insane. I can't even imagine how, like, that family must have felt. That's just like one story of many. I mean, H. Paul Rico was involved in pulling strings and pitting people against people and taking sides and making sure like the people that he wanted to came out on top of the Boston Irish Gang War in the 1960s. But John Connolly just took it to a whole different stratosphere. Roles were completely transferred, and the system was just completely broken. And I don't feel sorry for saying stuff like that. I thought John Connolly deserved to go to prison. He deserved to be in prison. And apparently, he's been released on compassionate release. He's had very bad diabetes, and he had melanomas all over his body. So the prison officials said he had about a year to live, and they released him in 2021 on compassionate release. Apparently, he's still alive, and I wasn't even aware of this. Somebody left that in the comments and told me, and there in the comment they said, yeah, he'll probably have a miraculous turnaround and live for another 10 years, and it's already been over 2 years, and they say he only had a year to live. So, whatever. I mean, I'm not Judge Jerry, an executioner. You know, as corny as it sounds, he took an oath to protect and serve. That's what police, FBI agents, DA, whatever the agency of law enforcement is, that's their job, is to protect and serve the community. And like, this guy was doing the exact opposite. You know, he was protecting violent, law-breaking gangsters instead of protecting honest, tax-paying citizens. That's just, he deserved to be prosecuted and put in prison for that. Whether he does that deserve to die in prison or die in home, that's not for me to say, and I'm not going to say that. So he went to prison, and he did deserve to go to prison. So that's that. I mean, the guy was involved in murders. You know, he didn't kill anybody specifically, but he was well aware of John Callahan and Roger Wheeler. Roger Wheeler was a 100% legitimate citizen. John Callahan was a CPA accountant. He wasn't a gangster. He was a fringe guy who was hanging around gangsters and liked the lifestyle and thought it was cool and wanted to be part of the gangsters. And that was very stupid of somebody who was like a legitimate person to do that. And unfortunately, you know, like I say in every video, make good choices, because choices are very important. And John Callahan made a choice and unfortunately paid the ultimate consequence. I don't think that he deserved what he got. Absolutely not. But what I'm saying is that he made bad choices, and that led to his untimely, terrible demise. But Roger Wheeler was a legitimate businessman and didn't do anything wrong. The only thing wrong he did was buy the company of the Hialeah or Jahalai, I don't know, race horsing tip told me how to say it right, but I forget already. But all he did was buy a company that Whitey was funneling a shitload of money out of. You know, John Callahan was the CPA that was cooking the books while they were all stealing millions of dollars from this company. So Roger Wheeler bought the company and had his own accountants look at the books and was like, you guys are stealing, you guys are robbing me blind. So that's the only thing he did wrong. And John Connolly was very hands-on in orchestrating and setting up these things and giving information that was vital to these guys being murdered, and then tried to cover for his boys. So in conclusion, John Connolly during his FBI career resembled more of a criminal and a gangster working for Whitey Bulger than he did a hard-working, honest FBI agent working for the U.S. government. Instead of protecting hard-working, honest, tax-paying citizens, he was protecting the dangerous, violent criminals that were preying on these honest, hard-working, tax-paying citizens. It's just another layer in the onion in the story of deceit, betrayal, and lies of the FBI in the city of Boston in the late 20th century. If you like this video, hit the like button. Subscribe if you're not subscribed. Leave me a comment, leave me a request, but most of all, people, make good choices, good decisions. Be kind to yourself, your loved ones, your family members, your friends. Have a great day. I'll talk to you soon. God bless.